He's hulking, he's hairy, and he's been spotted in remote locations all around the globe. Do you believe in Bigfoot? This is Robert Manni, host of Guys TV, and this week my special guest is author Mike Kozlowski. We're going to talk about his book about Bigfoot sightings in America and all around the globe. It all begins right here, right now on Guys TV. You can also catch me on KCAA Radio here in Southern California, Guys Radio, my worldwide podcast, and we're on UK Health Radio all weekend long. Guys TV, Guys Radio. Thanks for your support. Okay, Guys Radio. It is the interview portion of our show, and I'm delighted to bring on a new guest. His name is Michael Kozlowski, and he's done something that a lot of people have done. He's written a book. First of all, it's about Bigfoot. It's called Bigfoot Sightings, True Tales from Across America, but also from across the world, really. And also, he wrote this book with a fellow by the name of Jim Willis, who had done a lot of the digging on it early on. And then Jim passed, and Michael kind of inherited this book, and he threaded it together in a very expert way. So it's true to Jim's voice, but it also takes on Michael's perspective on this topic, which I think both authors had maybe slightly different perspectives on it, but it's all about Bigfoot. But first, let me tell you a little bit more about Michael. He lives in Detroit with his fiance and a whole gaggle of animals. He's an engineer, a singer, songwriter, golfer, huge sports fan, and he writes paranormal books. He writes some books about ghosts, a couple of suspense fillers in his John Angel series, Angel of Death and Fallen Angel. He's also written Some Days Suck, Some Days Suck Worse, fictional short horror stories. So interesting stuff. And now he's taken on this book, which is called Bigfoot Sightings, Tales from Across America, and he also has American Ghost Stories, True Tales from all 50 states. So they're all available online, and this new book, Bigfoot, just came out now. So welcome to Guys Radio, Michael Kozlowski from Detroit, Michigan.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. Appreciate it.
So I alluded to the fact that you had a little bit of a challenge writing this book, and I give you a lot of credit because writing a book is no easy task. And then writing a book with somebody who passed and you kind of inherited the files, it's a real challenge. So tell us you've written a lot of things about paranormal and ghosts. How did you get into the Bigfoot area and how did you get onto this project?
Originally I read a lot of horror fiction, kind of where my background is. I even did some memoir stuff back in the day that first got me into writing. But a few years back, I connected with Roger at Visible Ink Press. I was pitching some fiction stuff. He was pitching some other stuff, and we landed on, hey, let's write a story about ghosts and haunted places. And that was, as you alluded to, American Ghost Stories. This is my working copy, so it's got all the little budgets in there. But so that came out a few years ago, and I started working on another book, more of a general one. We'll probably talk about a little later, mysteries. And while I was working on that, Jim, another author for Roger on Visible Ink Press, was working on this Bigfoot book, and Jim's published several a couple dozen books, I think now, that are out and all over the paranormal field and supernatural and ancient civilizations. Just a very well-read, very well-rounded man. But he passed while working on this book, and rather unexpectedly. His wish was for the book to get finished. His family wanted to see it finished, and the publisher, of course, was happy to see it finished. So Roger gave me a call, knowing that Jim and I work in the same fields. We have pretty similar writing styles, really, in my opinion, as I came to find out. Asked me if I'd be interested. We had bounced around some ideas about a Bigfoot book previously as well. I don't know if those ideas ended up being in Jim's court, when he was working on this one. But anyway, I said, yeah, send the stuff over. Let me have a look. And Jim had largely completed a rough draft, the first draft. There were some chapters that were only titles, just kind of outlined, some that were kind of half finished, some that were really just cut and paste for me to put over into the new book, just some grammar editing and things like that, and getting them into flow within the whole structure of the book where it ended up. But it was a challenge, but it was an honor. It was humbling that, somebody, I know how, writers treat their work and their babies, so, anybody, his family included, being willing to give me, the reins and let me take over.
Okay.
That was very generous of them. And, I took that very seriously, tried to make sure that Jim's voice was heard, but also tried to make it clear that, we did have some differing opinions or perspectives. So there are spots in the book where it's very clearly Jim writing or very clearly me writing. They're usually pointed out. The rest of the book, I think we did a pretty good job of, you really can't tell if it's Jim or myself. We kind of made it in that gray area between us, and not drawing too many conclusions, which I don't do anyway, as
Mhm.
a
Okay.
general.
So how did you get briefly like into the whole ghost story and paranormal area? And why do you think
You
that is
know,
such a draw? What do you think? Why do you think, first of all, for you, but why do you think there's such an audience for this type of material?
So for me, I'm a Gen X kid, Stephen King fan. Read my Stephen King novel way too early, like a lot of others, and kind of fell into that. And when I got into writing, which was pretty late in life for me, a lot of people will tell you they wanted to be a writer since they were a kid. That wasn't my thing. I was an artist and a musician, but hadn't really done much writing as far as books go. I wrote a story about moving to Australia, kind of a memoir that got published and picked up, and it was a lot of fun. And I thought, man, this is great. I'm going to write some more stuff, but I wasn't moving anywhere else, so I needed to write something I liked and loved and knew about, and that was the horror genre. So I kind of went down the fiction road there, and then just in my kind of happenstance and meeting up with Roger and whatnot, that led me a little more down the
Okay.
paranormal, supernatural
Okay.
field.
So if you're when you're writing paranormal or ghost fiction, if you will, are there any kind of rules you have to go by, like expectations for that audience that they want the ghost to win or the ghost to? Are there any type of rules there that you have to follow,
I
a
don't
template?
I don't think in the fiction there is. I think horror fiction and sci-fi fiction, more than maybe a lot of other fictions, tend to have a message behind them.
Hmm. A
They're
warning or
forward.
something?
Yeah, exactly right. A lot of dystopian fiction, things that maybe, we might even be seeing in the world today now, that were written 50, 60 years ago, whether you're thinking about Bradbury
Hmm.
or
Right.
Orwell or whoever, right? As far as fans, I think generally they want good to win,
Hmm.
is the idea in the fiction stories. I kind of lean the other way. I sort of like the bad guy to win because the bad guy's fun to write.
Hmm. Right.
So
Of course.
I don't necessarily win, but I really enjoy writing the bad guys, right? They're a lot of fun. As far as the paranormal and supernatural, I think the one rule that I stick to is I never discount anybody's stories or experiences, right? Because I haven't had them. I may not believe the reasoning behind their stories, but and certainly there's fraudsters and hucksters and things that you'll run across, but 90% of the time, people are genuine, heartfelt. They believe what they're saying, whether they know what the explanation for that is or not. They may have drawn a conclusion that I don't agree with, but their experience, shouldn't be
Okay.
discounted.
Okay. So my special guest on today's Guys Radio is author Michael Kozlowski, who's written a book with the departed, excuse me, Jim Willis. It's called Bigfoot Sightings: True Tales from Across America. So when you got into this, because you kind of got introduced into the project, what was your take on Bigfoot, which is also known as Yeti, Yowie, Abominable Snowman, Sasquatch, Yeren, Jugabina in Australia, the Almas, and so many others. It's kind of a universal concept of this big 9 foot tall, hairy guy kind of wandering around. And I've read a lot about it, and I don't know what to think, but I want to get into that. But what was your initial take before getting involved in the project?
Sure. So I like to say I'm an optimistic skeptic when I write all these things. I tend to approach them as a non-believer. I want somebody to prove it to me. I'm an engineer by day. That's
Mhm.
that side of the brain in me working. I want facts and figures and information. I would say going into this book, if somebody asked me, what's my percentage of believing that Bigfoot exists, I'd maybe put it down into the possibly even under 10%. Having written the book, I would say I've not crossed the 50% line yet, but I'm certainly more up toward, say, the 30 or 40, maybe 30% that Bigfoot still exists, and maybe even higher than that, probably quite a bit higher than that, that a creature like a Bigfoot, a Sasquatch did exist if it doesn't still exist.
It's interesting because a lot of people have reportedly have seen a Sasquatch, and there's not that much recorded. There's the one film that was done in Northern California about 30 years ago of the guy who's looking over his shoulder.
Yeah, the
And
Patterson
I love
Gimlin,
it.
the
It's like the Mona Lisa. You can interpret it so many different ways, but that really put the concept on the map. But this is something that may tie back to, if we go and you get into this in the book, there were giants roaming the earth, and they have skeletons that they found our planet of really, really large people. So I'm wondering if, and I'd like to get your take on it from your research, is there a connection between this Bigfoot quote unquote mythology and the giants that were actually here? Because there is physical proof of that.
Yeah, I believe there is. I think, stories of giants are as old as stories themselves, whether it's Norse mythology and, Titans and things like that, whether it's Goliath in the Bible. So as with most mythologies, there's typically a grain of truth or some sort of warning in there that's driving that story, don't go out in the woods because there's a monster, it's just
Right.
bad business to wander out in the woods, right? So create a monster for the kids to stay away from because a bear might eat them. And I think, the truth of giants existing or large, large people, like you said, there is, it's not doubted
Like
that there's
really
proof of
large
it.
people, right?
Yeah, really large people, right? Those stories certainly would have contributed to stories of a giant creature or a giant, um, race of creatures. Maybe that gets warped in mythologies into, a beast. Maybe it gets mixed with, first sightings of orangutans and apes that, imagine running into a gorilla for the first time and nobody's ever seen one. Geez, it's just some huge hairy person, right? It looks just like us. So I think all of that contributes to the mythology, whether there is an actual Bigfoot or it's a mix of these, stories.
So I guess just from a perspective of a layman, I would think one, you have these big creatures and the mythology behind them being spotted around the world. Of course, there's a lot of photographs and stuff of footprints, and then you've spotted a couple of them. So the question is begged. I guess most people would say, well, where do you think they live? Are they and why? And they haven't hurt anybody. It doesn't seem like any reports of Bigfoot attacks, or what are they all about? Do they live inside the earth? Do they have such great areas like hideaways and caves and stuff? You would think with all of the radar and everything else that we have, that we'd be able to, the technology, we'd be able to find out where they are.
Yeah. Yeah, there are some, there's a wide range of theories on what Bigfoot is, and some of those would answer that question, whether it's, related to aliens or interdimensional beings and things like that, which I don't particularly prescribe to those opinions. I think, if Bigfoot exists, it's an organic being. I think it seems like we should be able to have pictures and photos and video, more than what we have, or more conclusive anyway. Some theories on that, Bigfoot has a cloaking ability and you can't get a good picture because it blurs the camera and stuff like that. I don't necessarily prescribe to that either. I don't like to put layers on top of more mysteries,
Right.
another mystery, another mystery. I think what probably makes sense is that it's a pretty small population, if it still exists. There's something called viable population theory, which, creatures from 50 to 500 can establish a genetic diversity enough to continue a population, right? So that's a small number. Let's just even take 500, which is big. And if you just said in the Northwest area where, is probably the most popular for Bigfoot sightings, and the millions and millions of acres there that, are
Right.
largely unexplored and untouched and hardly
Mm-hmm.
visited, 500 creatures over that space would, and if they're actively trying to avoid you as well, would be hard to locate, right? It'd be amazing to bump into one, you know.
It's
Um,
it's interesting. Have you found that they found animal carcasses or anything that has been, looks like it's been attacked by something like a Bigfoot? Because the question is what are these like? Do they just eat vegetation? Where do they eat? Where do they defecate? How do they, with the babies
Sure.
and all of that, how do they propagate? What's from what you've done, from your deep dive that you've done in this book, Bigfoot Sightings? What have you got out and the blocking and tackling of this? There's a Bigfoot. Let's say they're out there. How do they kind of roll?
All right, I'll give you my
Please.
theory. So there's other theories offered in the book, certainly, and this isn't
Sure.
isn't what I would call a conclusion. It's just kind of my working theory. I think it's a very small population. I think they're probably a creature that is solitary most of the time, and maybe gathering together in small family units on occasion. My idea is that they migrate, over a pretty wide space. They come in contact to mate, and just very occasionally, so that you don't have groups of them together very often.
Mhm.
As far as dying and finding a carcass of an actual Bigfoot. If there's only a handful of them, the nature has a way of getting rid of the evidence pretty quickly. I'm a hunter. I'm in the woods a lot. I very rarely run across a deer carcass in an area
Mhm.
where it is just littered with deer, right?
Okay.
But I hardly ever see one. Um, and if I'm looking for one carcass in a 1,000 acre wood,
Mhm.
as it were,
It's like where do
uh,
the animals go to
right,
die, right?
right,
Like you
yeah,
don't see a
exactly.
lot of dead birds. I
And
mean, you
if
see
they're an
some.
intelligent being like we believe, more intelligent than say the most intelligent great ape, which is very intelligent, no reason to believe they don't have some sort of burial practice or something like that. That makes it even more difficult to find. As far as finding like scat, DNA evidence, an animal that's attacked, it's really just sort of
Some
similar. I
type of
think the
DNA.
opportunities are so slim
Mhm.
that it's almost impossible to do it just accidentally. Um, that's sort of my theory. I think there's just not as many of them as people maybe believe there are. And they're just that much harder to locate and to find evidence of for that because of that purpose
Now,
reason.
the from your studying and in the book, Bigfoot Sightings, True Tales from Across America, which is really across the world. Um, the as we talked about earlier in the show, the different names for the Bigfoot. In China, it's called the Yeren. In Australia, it's the Hugabina, the abominable
Yowie,
snow.
Russia, Chutuna.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what are the similarities and what are the differences that have been researched in terms of this being that comes across the world and comes by different names based on
Yeah,
cultures?
sort of the modern sightings are all very similar. Large, hairy being, varies in color usually. Of course, in the Himalayas, where the Yeti or the abominable snowman, which is really, our first experience as a Western culture of this sort of creature. It's thought to be white and it lives up in the
Right.
mountains, and it's,
With
uh,
Rudolph, right?
yeah, exactly, right. Yeah, the abominable. So when I was a kid, the abominable snowman, I thought abominable meant big. It was all I could have figured. But and it was my first experience, right? Was meeting it on the Rudolph cartoon. But yeah, that's kind of the image we have for it. Or even in the Monsters Inc. cartoons, they had one that appeared, right? And then here it's brown or black, typically, in the Pacific Northwest or Appalachia in the U.S. But generally, a very similar creature, large, hairy, hominin in nature. You get into different mythologies and back in time a bit, down into, Native American cultures and things like that. There's more crossover where people maybe are trying to insert the idea of Bigfoot into some of the stories, but also, you could see where they could influence a story, whether it's a skinwalker in Native American culture or something like that. But largely, very much the same. Now, in some areas in Indonesia, there's one called the orang pendek, which similar to orangutan, orang pendek, is a smaller creature, normal size, average feet, but could certainly be related, right? Just a smaller version of Bigfoot.
But now, behaviorally, what I find interesting is that, and I don't know if in any of the cultures they had stories of, I could be wrong, the Bigfoot attacking people. I mean, obviously, the abominable snowman is a scary creature, and in
Sure.
some cultures they had something with, I think in Argentina or something, where the creature had like a mouth with teeth in its abdominal
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
area. But overall, you haven't heard anything about these things attacking.
Now,
Humans.
typically, they seem to be fairly passive. I'd say the more stories you hear of a Sasquatch or a Bigfoot
Mhm.
attack or some sort of aggressive behavior is in stories more recent, anywhere from the 1924 Ape Canyon story,
Mhm.
which was Northern California,
Wa-
Washington, yeah,
Washington
Mountain State
State,
College,
Mountain
yeah,
St. Helens, right? Ape
Washington
Canyon,
State,
right?
yeah. Yeah, and so they were miners or loggers. Escapes me exactly, but they came across a group of these creatures that then surround and they shot at them, and one was shot, and then the group came back in the evening and was throwing rocks and banging on the. So it tends to be more of a reactionary when
Hmm.
you hear the stories, like they're defending their territory, defending themselves, chasing people off. Haven't heard of anyone being killed by a Sasquatch.
Or camping. Like, I mean, with bears, bears are always attacking campsites, getting food. They'll pick up
Right.
the bag and they'll go off with
Yeah,
it. I
and
mean,
there's
they're
no reason to
smart.
believe,
Yeah.
that Sasquatch isn't, when we do encounter them, that it's not because they're coming close to us for food or
Mhm.
something like that, right? Like that's why we're interacting with them, where they would otherwise be, elusive.
Now, also these Sasquatch or Bigfoot, the encounters have been talked about by indigenous people for centuries. So, how has that the stories that they tell consistent with what you've researched from around the world?
Consistent in the general kind of look of the creature, I'd say. Tends to be similar. Uh, Native American, even Nepalese cultures, the creature tends to be more supernatural, more of a protector of the land sort of thing. But that's very common in, those mythologies anyway, right? It's all everything's connected with nature and so for a creature to be, kind of the big brother, and in many cultures they call the creature a brother, right? In Native American culture especially. They consider it just another hominin, another, creature of the earth as they do with any other animal or person.
Now, what was the biggest surprise you stumbled across when you were researching and writing this book, Mike?
I think what I was most surprised about and what interested me the most and probably moved my dial the most was the amount of evidence for, like you had mentioned, we know there's large humans that have existed and whatnot, but the amount of evidence for those creatures, those hominins, to have been in places prior to, what we believe humans have existed. Like in Mexico, there's a cave 100,000 years ago, we think, is when we started wandering around on, this side of the continent or the country or the world, across the Bering Strait and all of that. But then you find tool usage 100,000 years before that, and when, where did that come from? That's what the dating showing us. So I think it's opening up our eyes to the idea that there had been maybe previous migrations, that we know animals migrated across previous Bering Strait land bridges and, ice bridges and things like that prior to humans moving out of, Africa and Asia. So the amount of evidence that points to, other hominin beings, other human type creatures or species, either being in, the Western areas that we wouldn't have expected, or even just being, you know, uh, in earlier in Europe or, Asia or whatever. That probably surprised me the most because not being necessarily a student of that science, I was kind of thought we had settled on that, right? Even though we kind of knew.
Right.
And then you start getting all, digging into all the information, like, wow, there's so much more that, opens up the possibility of this.
Mhm. Now, I guess, Mike, the biggest, pieces of evidence are the footprints where people have taken samples
Sure.
of those. Is there a consistency in the footprints, or are they so different that it throws a lot of doubt in what it could be and the possibilities of there being a Bigfoot? Or like if they were like
Yeah.
if every footprint was the same, then you could say, okay, there's something going on here. But it seems like there's I'm not gonna say random, but they're different.
Yeah, definitely varied. And like the Patterson Gimlin film you mentioned earlier, the footprints that they found in that area were only like size 12, size 13 footprints. They weren't, wasn't 20-inch,
Right. Mhm.
footprints they were walking around. So it's like, well, that's not that much. That's not that impressive,
Right,
right?
right. That's
You know,
you're in the NBA, right?
yeah, exactly. And they've kind of landed on, I'd say the sort of average footprint size is something around like 18 inches, I believe, right, from toe to heel, which is that's a big foot for sure. But as you said, there's a variety of sizes that are found now. People attribute that, well, that was a young one, that was a juvenile, that was whatever, and that's why the sizes are different.
Mhm.
And certainly there is a rabbit hole all of its own on Bigfoot footprints and dermal. You want to talk about dermal ridges for 20 hours, go down a Bigfoot Reddit and
With
hopefully.
that in mind, and these people who are really really into Bigfoot and I guess there's got to be a way to monetize it. But is there like an investigation expedition like right now going on where they're looking to find Bigfoot the same way they look to find the Loch Ness monster or whatever? Is there
Yeah,
or is it sporadic?
I think it's a little more sporadic. I mean, you have things like you have the reality TV shows like Finding Bigfoot and Bigfoot Hunter and whatever that I guess you could call an ongoing expedition of sorts. I don't love those shows. I can only get through about two or three of them before I'm like, this is the same show every week, and if you found Bigfoot, we'd know about it already. You're not going to surprise me tomorrow on tomorrow's show, probably, right? We probably would have heard. But there's not a real academic effort, I don't think. Very few and far between. And actually, surprised to me, I just found out this past week that Dr. Jeff Meldrum, has been a huge Bigfoot researcher. He's a professor university, and he just passed. So, one of probably he may be the kind of Bigfoot expert as far as North America is concerned, and so they lost a good one as far as you know promoting or researching in that area. But to your point, I think it's very far and few between. It's a bit like ghost hunting, or UFOs or aliens. If there is a funded government search going on, I don't know about it. There have been in the past. There have been expeditions. There's been government funded expeditions in Russia. There's been, of
Because
course, the
Putin said
expedition.
he's seen three of them, right?
Yeah, Vladimir Putin said he saw a family of three as he was flying over Siberia in a helicopter. And I mean, you got to believe it because everybody that was with him says it's the truth. So,
So, speaking of being all over the world, have you noticed any type of and understanding that the planet was set up a little bit differently in the past with the shifts with the
Pangea and
plates? Yeah.
whatnot, sure.
So, was there any type of migratory pattern that maybe they started here and they ended up here and they stopped here along the way and some of them stayed there? Is there any type of uh, directionality to that?
Sure. Yeah. From my research, it very much follows, what we understand as human migration, kind of the out of Africa through Asia theory, across the Bering Strait or, west into, more into Europe. So very, very similar pattern, from what we can tell, as human migration and the kind of archival evidence, and fossils, seem to back that up.
Now, also, some people say maybe the Bigfoots have some type of ET connection or they're spiritual. What was your learning when you were researching that aspect of Bigfoot?
Yeah, I didn't really find anything evidentiary of that. So, nothing that somebody said, well, this is why I think they have a UFO or this thing or this that I found or this picture that I took or whatever. Now there's stories of I saw a Bigfoot, I looked up there was a UFO. So I think they're together.
Mhm.
Or I looked and then it was gone, so they must be interdimensional. Those are how the stories tend to be. And I feel
Mhm.
to me, one, like I said earlier, I don't like to put more mystery on top of a mystery already. It's finding Bigfoot's hard enough on its own. I don't know that we need to jump to that it's an alien or it's an interdimensional being right away. There's enough mystery involved. If there was evidence to suggest that, sure. It tends to me to be more of a reason given for uncomfortable questions, right?
Hmm.
Why don't we have a body? Well, they're interdimensional, so we would never find one. It's over in some other realm that we can't exist. I'm not saying these are not possible theories or that they could be true even. I don't know.
Hmm.
I'm not there yet. I haven't answered the question. I haven't cracked the code, but I just tend not to believe them. I don't see the evidence for them.
Okay. My special guest on Guys Radio, Mike Kozlowski. He wrote a fantastic book on Bigfoot sightings, true tales from across America with the late Jim Willis. Okay, there's that piece of film from, I think it's 1957, that somebody took the pictures of the Bigfoot walking, and then he turns and he looks back over at the photographer, and
Yes.
then I think it gets cut off, and I think there's other film that for some reason we don't see that this guy took a couple of minutes later. But what's your sense of that? Because that's quite a long time ago. That's like when that's the same age as the Rolling Stones, you know?
Yeah.
That's been around for a while. We haven't had anything really new, except I saw something online on social media in the last couple of weeks. I don't know if you've seen this, where the guy insists he has a headshot, and like this is this Bigfoot, and then here's his wife, and but it doesn't seem like there's been a lot of more photographic evidence, if you will, since the 1967. And what do you think about that 1967 footage?
Yeah, so the Patterson Gimlin film, the most famous, that's the 1967 footage. That's I'm trying to remember the area that was. It's in
Northern California.
Northern California, um, kind of around where the canyon incident happened, actually. Um, that definitely the most famous. That frame, I think it's frame 352, I think, if I get my number right. I'm trying to remember, pull out of my head, is the famous, that's the
Right.
Bigfoot picture, right?
Yeah.
That's what we all see.
Yeah.
It's actually called Patty, because of Patterson. Um, so first, I'll say about the film, that particular film. There's nothing in it that convinces me one way or the other. My first reaction would be, somebody in a suit or whatever, if somebody just showed me that film. There's people that say they've analyzed it, they've enhanced it, they can see muscle tone and all that.
Right.
I don't see it. I see shadows, I see color differentiation in maybe in the fur on the creature. I don't see anything that to me says, yeah, that's definitely an organic being, not somebody in a suit or whatever. That said, the film itself doesn't cause me as much concern as how the film was made and the events leading up to the film being made. Patterson was known to kind of be a fame seeker, a couple different issues, not just Bigfoot. Was interested in Bigfoot, ended up going out on someone's advice to that area, but went with the intent of making kind of a mockumentary, right? A movie about looking for Bigfoot and
Hmm.
about, and
Hmm.
he had Indian guides,
Right.
they weren't really Indian guides, they were guys dressed up like Indians,
Okay.
guiding along, whatever, right? So if you're making that film, you want it to be popular, you want to be famous. You have to imagine the climax of that film was going to be a Bigfoot somewhere, right? Whether it was a suit that was ready to be done or whatever. That they just happenstance came across Bigfoot while they were making a Bigfoot film is either incredible luck or there's something else to it. So that gives me more pause on the film than anything, and leads me to believe less in its authenticity.
Hmm.
Films since then, there's some films about similar quality that I think maybe are even more believable just based on the reactions of the participants, even though the sighting isn't any better, the viewing of the creature isn't necessarily any better. It's something in the distance walking on a hill or whatever. But either they're better actors or just more convincing uh, participants in the films. The pictures you've mentioned, I mentioned that Bigfoot hunter in my book. I won't use his name right now, but yeah, the close-ups and
Right. Yeah.
over the shoulder and whatever, and those are largely believed to be BS, right? And if they weren't, and this person was so skilled at getting these creatures to show up and pose for pictures, I think he'd have a lot more proof to offer us than
Mhm.
just that.
Okay, fair enough. Now they refer to these creatures that are like Bigfoot as cryptids, I believe.
Mhm.
What is a cryptid for our listeners and viewers? And what are some other examples of them around the world and
Sure.
throughout our
So
history?
a cryptid is basically any creature um, outside of sort of the realm of science thought to exist, usually, of some sort of supernatural bent. Maybe it has some sort of powers. Maybe it's just something that's long existed. So the Loch Ness monster, not necessarily a supernatural being, but supposedly a dinosaur from era, right, that has existed and swims around. The Mothman
Right.
is an example of a cryptid that maybe is more supernatural, or the Chupacabra.
Hmm.
Um, Bigfoot obviously is the most famous. I think I say obviously. I think that's an accurate statement. But Loch Ness Monster, any of those sort of water creatures, there's a number of those, and it tends to be um, my experience, cryptids, you'll know the one famous one or the two famous ones, but there's many, many. If there's a Loch Ness monster, then there's another 30 similar creatures in
Hmm.
different bays and lakes and things around the world.
Now, if you had an unlimited budget and they said, Mike, you've done all of this research, you've got all this knowledge, and you're very objective about this, how would you go about tracking down Bigfoot?
Yeah, well, with the technology we have today, I'd certainly be incorporating drones, and any of that sort of video technology that's available to us that hasn't been in the past. Motion sensors and trail cameras and all those sort of things. I'd probably concentrate. If I had an unlimited budget, it'd probably be twofold. I'd probably be trying to retrace some steps of Sir Edmund Hillary and see what I could find in the Himalayas, in the what we'll call the birthplace, the cradle of Bigfoot.
Mhm.
And then I would probably say the Pacific Northwest, just based on the amount of sightings and activity. That's the most active area. Maybe a few other areas, Appalachia, Kentucky, Tennessee area. Surprisingly, the Midwest has a lot more sightings than I would have imagined. And yeah, it would just have to be, um, trying to catch it on film, and just encompassing large, large areas and being out there. I would not suggest, and I always say, I would not suggest going out there and trying to sound like a Bigfoot. I think that's maybe the silliest thing that we do when we're going to look for things, is to try to make noises that are like them, because I don't know their language, right? So I don't know what I'm saying, if I'm just speaking gibberish or if I'm saying something very offensive.
And now, has there ever been any recordings of them vocalizing anything?
Yeah, so believed to be a lot of hooting, whistling, howling, some very frightening screeching, that doesn't really sound like anything I know of, right? I can't say that's a wolf or whatever. Um, lot of belief that they communicate in like knocking wood together or knocking on trees. So there's a lot of vocalization and communication beliefs that we have. Again, we don't know the language. It'd kind of be like standing in the middle of China and just yelling out words that you think sound Chinese. People probably run away from you rather than come to you. Right?
Mhm. So you've got this book. It just came out in August, Bigfoot Sightings, True Tales from Across America. Michael Kozlowski, my special guest on Guys Radio. What's when you see what's next in terms of your experience with Bigfoot after this? You wrote this book. You have your own
Yep.
perspective. It seems like you're kind of on the fence, as you say. You're an optimist, but kind of like a what was the term you used?
Optimistic skeptic.
Optimistic skeptic. I love it.
I want
Where
to
do you
believe
go?
that magic.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
What?
want to believe magic exists
I
in the
mean,
world.
are
Right?
you going to be out on the the circuit then for and going to a lot of Bigfoot conventions and getting into more and more, going deeper and deeper down the rabbit hole with Bigfoot now? Where are you with
Quite
this?
possibly. It wasn't necessarily my intent. I don't claim to be an expert, even with the ghost books. I'm newer in the paranormal, supernatural field. So it's a lot of the fun of writing it is really I'm taking the journey with the readers. I'm learning at the same time, and certainly after the books come out, I get information from people and more information, and things to chase and research. I've had some offers. The Bigfoot is super popular. So, I'm doing a lot of interviews like your show, which is
Mhm.
great, talking to a lot of people, meeting a lot of people, meet some really wonderfully crazy people. I've been invited out to do some field research, which I'd love to do.
Oh, great.
So I definitely would like to dive in a little bit more, and maybe there'll be another book behind that, but more of a personal experiences sort of book. Just yeah, kind of seeing where it goes. I've got some other stuff to work on in the meantime, but I'm certainly open to diving deeper.
Fantastic. So, Michael, tell us where everybody can find more about you, your website, the book, and your other books.
Yeah, so the best place to start is my website. It's www.mikekozlowski.com. Pretty simple. There's links to everything from there. You can find links to the books on Amazon. You can get them at Barnes and Noble. Any of your local bookstores should have them. If they don't, they can order them in. And if you're an indie bookstore supporter, which I am as well, please just ask them to order it in for you, and they'll do that right away. Um, you can get both American Ghost Stories and the Bigfoot book on Amazon, along with some of my fiction work, the short story collection, Some Days Suck, Some Days Suck Worse, my couple of John Angel thriller novels. So all that's available. Again, probably the easiest place to start is my website, mikekozlowski.com. You can also reach out to me there through email.
Okay.
Sorry.
Fantastic. So, listen, thanks for being on the show. Best of luck with the book. Best of luck in your dogged research in terms of learning more about Bigfoot. And is there any one thing, real quick, that you want the audience to take away from? Should they waste their time on Bigfoot, or is it a good use of their time to learn more about it? Is there any significance to the fact that there might be some creatures out there living up in the hills?
I don't know what this necessarily the significance is. I'm not going to say it's going to change your life or mine if we discover that Bigfoot's out there.
Mm,
But, wonder and magic and amazing things in the world is, I think, what makes it worth living. So, if you're interested, why not? Why not see if you can find one?
perfect. Thanks for being on Guys Radio. Mike Kozlowski.
Thanks.
If you enjoy the guests and content I bring you each and every week to Guys TV and Guys Radio, please support us by subscribing to our channels and platforms. Thank you.